Pam Bondi dismantles Jasmine Crockett in fiery live debate. Crowd erupts in disbelief. Under the glowing intensity of the Capitol Clash studio lights, the air was electric, but not yet volatile. The audience, a fusion of MAGA loyalists and progressive warriors, packed the studio wall to wall. Signs, subtle jeers, and expectant eyes filled the space like smoke before a fire. The floor reflected the tension polished, clinical, waiting. Rachel Harper, the ever-poised host, introduced the two titans of the evening, Pam Bondi, former Attorney General of Florida, and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a rising progressive firebrand. As Bondi entered the stage, there was no flashiness, only authority. Her navy blue suit was sharply pressed, her gait measured, her reputation preceded her. Tonight, Harper announced, we witness a clash not just of politics, but of two distinctly American worldviews. Jasmine Crockett turned with a deliberate smile and struck first, not with data, but a dig. Miss Bondi, she purred, you're seasoned, sure. But how do you defend Trump's tariffs that hurt the very people you claim to protect? The audience murmured a tension-setting jab. Bondi didn't flinch. She clasped her hands calmly on the desk. Congresswoman, she replied, voice steady as courtroom marble. I've stood with workers in Pennsylvania and Iowa. They don't call tariffs pain. They call them protection. What you call policy damage, they call survival. A low roar erupted applause from the conservative corner. Rachel raised her hand, but it was clear the match had ignited. The first strike had landed, but the battle was far from over. Crockett leaned forward, her voice sharpened by years of ideological conviction. You say tariffs protect. I say they punish. Farmers lost markets. Workers lost jobs. That's not protection, Miss Bondi. That's regression. You cite loyalty. I cite loss. Her delivery was confident, even rehearsed. The progressive section of the audience nodded, murmurs of support rippling like echoes in a canyon. On. Pam Bondi didn't blink. She adjusted her microphone with the ease of someone who'd done this 100 times before press conferences, hearings, televised panels. Then, with the composed clarity of a prosecutor preparing to enter evidence, she spoke. Congresswoman, farmers didn't lose their livelihoods because of tariffs. They lost them years ago to bad trade deals. You still defend. I've met steelworkers in Ohio who can now feed their families again. Trump didn't create the damage. He confronted it. The tone wasn't emotional, it was deliberate, measured. The kind of voice you use when reading facts into the congressional record. Crockett shot back. Are we rewriting history now? Tariffs raised prices, hurt exports. Look at the Department of Agriculture, over 200,000 agricultural jobs impacted. Is that your idea of putting America first? Pam's reply came with surgical calm. Jobs were impacted, yes, but by policies that ignored China's manipulation for decades. You want data? Try the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Unemployment in Detroit dropped from 7% to 4% under Trump. That's not a slogan, that's a shift. She leaned back slightly. Her hands remained still, not defensive, just grounded. You accuse me of spinning narratives. I say you're reciting headlines. The MAGA section of the audience erupted again this time, with standing applause. Phones were lifted. Reels were rolling. Even Rachel Harper looked momentarily stunned by the precision of the exchange. Crockett tried to redirect, invoking Trump's tax cuts and their benefits to the rich. But Bondi cut in. I've prosecuted fraud, Congresswoman, and I've seen what real relief looks like. Small businesses keeping their doors open, not filing for bankruptcy because their margins were protected. You talk about fighting for the poor. I ask, where were you when they were left behind by the same deals you're defending? This wasn't just a debate, it was a deposition. And Bondi had just entered her first exhibit. Jasmine Crockett sat taller in her chair, shifting her posture as though physically bracing against Bondi's last strike. The crowd noise still lingered like the aftershock of a courtroom verdict. She inhaled and launched again, this time faster, sharper defensive. Miss Bondi, you're a seasoned litigator, but even you can't cross-examine reality. The data is public. The Department of Agriculture clearly reports tariff impacts lost revenue, shuttered farms. Trump didn't just hurt our global standing, he hurt families. You're here polishing his legacy while people suffer. She was trying to regain momentum, fueling her words with passion. Her hands moved, eyes flared. But there was a tremble beneath the fire, a kind of unease familiar to anyone who's ever started to lose control of the room. Pam Bondi sat still. She didn't rush, didn't raise her voice. She just lifted her gaze, measured, even, and responded with the slow cadence of someone who knows she holds the stronger case. Congresswoman, Bondi began, emotion doesn't overwrite causation. You're citing pain but assigning it to the wrong source. Do you know how many jobs were lost to Chinese dumping practices? I do. I had to fight for those workers when federal policy wouldn't. She adjusted a note card in front of her not for effect, but because she'd come prepared. She glanced at the audience, then back to Crockett. You talk about people suffering. I've walked through communities in Pennsylvania where factories had been boarded up for a decade until tariffs finally gave them a fighting chance. You say pain, I say revival. The silence in the studio was no longer anticipation, it was gravity. Rachel Harper, sensing the temperature shift, interjected lightly. Congresswoman Crockett, would you like to respond? Jasmine leaned in. Revival for who, Miss Bondi? The stock market? Wall Street? Trump's policies raised food prices by 10%, hurting the exact working-class families he claims to champion. You're not defending workers. You're defending a man who disrespected women, slashed safety nets, and gave tax breaks to billionaires. A few claps trickled from the progressive side, but they were hesitant now, measured. The narrative had shifted. Crockett was no longer on offense. She was just trying to survive the crossfire. Bondi didn't respond right away. She let the moment breathe. Then, calmly, I have represented victims of abuse, fraud, and political indifference. And I'll say this plainly, you don't need to shout to be strong. You don't need a viral moment to tell the truth. She paused just long enough. President Trump appointed me not because I parroted a line, but because I delivered results. I fought corruption. I dismantled pill mills. I brought justice to people who couldn't afford a lobbyist. You want to talk about who protects women? I have the case files. The audience erupted again this time, with less hesitation and more thunder. Cheers from the MAGA corner overlapped with the scraping of chairs as a few progressive viewers stood, unsure if to leave or stay stunned. Crockett was losing her grip, and she knew it. She tried to pivot. Let's talk healthcare, Miss Bondi. While you're defending trade wars, 30 million Americans still lack insurance. That's not a win, that's a crisis. I've authored bills to raise the minimum wage, protect unions, and secure health funding. What have you done for them lately? Bondi's tone didn't change. She leaned slightly forward now, but it wasn't aggression, it was surgical proximity. You authored legislation. I've enforced the law. When I was Attorney General of Florida, I took on corporations, prosecuted Medicaid fraud, and returned millions in restitution to families. You're in Congress. I respect that. But what good are bills if they stay buried in committee hearings and press releases? The room went silent. And by the way, prescription drug prices dropped 20% under Trump. The Department of Health and Human Services can confirm that. Your narrative is tidy, but it's not complete. Jasmine Crockett opened her mouth, but no words came. For the first time all night, she hesitated. Harper glanced between the two women. For once, the host wasn't driving the segment had taken on a momentum of its own. She lifted her cue cards but didn't speak. She knew what everyone watching now understood. Control of the room had changed hands. Pam Bondi turned back to the audience calm, composed. A legal strategist with nothing left to prove. You say, we're abandoning the poor. I say, we're empowering them. You say we're covering for failure. I say, we're correcting it, not with tweets, not with symbolism, but with law, policy, and backbone. There was no yelling, no theatrical flourish, just a slow tilt of the head, a stillness in her expression, and a confidence that seemed carved from years of courtroom crossfire. A standing ovation erupted from the MAGA audience. Rachel Harper adjusted her mic. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back after the break, though I'm not sure the temperature will ever cool off after that exchange. As the camera panned across the audience, social media was already exploding. Clips of Bondi's rebuttal were being clipped and captioned. This isn't politics. This is prosecution. Others simply read, #BondiBurnsCrockett. Crockett leaned back in her chair, hands still in her lap, her smile strained. She wasn't out of the fight, but the tide had clearly turned. Pam Bondi, unshaken, sat quietly, eyes level with the lens, as if daring the next question to come. And the crowd? The crowd wasn't waiting for answers anymore. They were waiting for Bondi's next exhibit. The room hadn't settled. Even as the break was announced, the tension crackled like static in the air. Phones buzzed. Audience members whispered in charged tones. On social media, the hashtag Bondi Dominates, surged past 1 million mentions. Video clips were already being clipped, captioned, remixed, but Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished, not yet. When the cameras came back on, her tone had shifted. No longer charging like a political firebrand, she now carried the careful inflection of someone trying to recover ground, not with data, but with identity. Miss Bondi, she began, slowly, clearly controlling her cadence. As women, we share a responsibility to pursue justice, to preserve peace, and to protect those who don't sit in rooms like this. You speak of strength, but the Trump administration increased military spending by 7% in 1 year alone. That's not peace, that's escalation. The crowd listened respectfully. The progressive section leaned in, hopeful. This was a shift from economic numbers and trade policies to something more emotive: gender, morality, war and peace. I'm a woman of color, Crockett continued. I represent communities often ignored: workers, mothers, immigrants, the vulnerable. And while you defend tariffs and hardline policies, I ask you this: how do you stand behind a man who disrespects the very people we're supposed to uplift? There it was. Her strongest card, an appeal to moral identity, collective female responsibility, and an implied betrayal. It landed with force. Even Rachel Harper raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Pam Bondi didn't respond immediately. She simply breathed. Then, slowly, she brought her hands together on the desk and looked Crockett in the eye. Congresswoman, Bondi said, I respect your service. I respect your fight. But let's not confuse sentiment with substance. She turned slightly toward the camera, her voice measured firm without flourish. Peace isn't a speech. It's security. And security isn't weakness, it's resolve. Under President Trump, 90% of ISIS senior leadership was eliminated. That's not escalation. That's protection. Not just for our troops, but for mothers raising children in a world where terrorism isn't an abstract threat. The audience murmured, some stunned, others nodding. You invoke military budgets as though numbers alone tell the story. I've read the intelligence reports. I've worked with law enforcement. Peace doesn't come from hoping evil will behave. It comes from ensuring it can't reach our shores. Bondi's voice hadn't risen, but it carried more weight now, more finality. Crockett leaned forward. Security for who, Miss Bondi? While you're counting missiles and raids, 30 million Americans don't have health insurance. Women die in childbirth in this country at higher rates than any developed nation. Black communities face higher mortality, higher unemployment, and lower access to care. You talk security, I talk survival. A few audience members clapped. Her voice had strength again, emotional strength. But Bondi's expression didn't shift. Survival, Bondi echoed, is exactly why I stood against pharmaceutical abuse in Florida. It's why I prosecuted Medicaid fraud. It's why I fought for laws that protected the vulnerable, not with hashtags, but with enforcement. Then, she did something subtle, leaned forward, eyes calm, voice cooler. You mentioned healthcare. Let's talk numbers. Under Trump, prescription drug prices dropped 20%. That's not a tweet. That's the Department of Health and Human Services. That's measurable relief. The progressive section quieted. The MAGA side leaned forward again. You say, I defend someone who disrespects women. I say he appointed me to represent one of the largest states in the country, at a time when voices like yours said it couldn't be done. Now, Bondi turned fully toward the audience, owning the space. Being a woman in politics doesn't mean we all agree. It means we fight for what we believe. And I believe safety matters, truth matters, accountability matters, and results matter more than applause. Rachel Harper adjusted her seat, lips parted, momentarily unsure whether to jump in or let it ride. But Crockett wasn't done. She rallied emotionally. You say truth matters, then speak it. Tariffs raised food prices 10%. That's the Economic Policy Institute. Trump's trade war hurt rural America. You want to talk about truth? The truth is, working class families are still recovering, and women are still earning less, dying more, and being ignored in rooms just like this. Bondi's answer came low and lethal. You don't get to corner the market on pain, Congresswoman. I've stood in courtrooms with single mothers testifying against traffickers. I've gone toe to toe with opioid manufacturers. I've walked with grieving parents in towns where law failed them. She paused. And unlike Congress, I didn't have the luxury of symbolic bills. I had to act. Now her voice hardened, not raised, but intensified. You say Trump hurt women? Tell that to the families who got their sons back from war zones because he ended wasteful conflict. Tell that to the small business owners, women who got tax relief and kept their doors open through lockdowns. Tell that to the mother who pays $30 less per month for insulin. I have. And they don't feel disrespected. They feel heard. The audience was no longer reacting in waves, it was thundering. Applause surged like a current. Phone shot up. The moderator's voice crackled over the speaker, trying to restore order. Rachel Harper interjected. Let's remember, ladies, this is still a conversation, Miss Crockett. But Crockett's next words didn't land the same. Miss Bondi, I respect your strength. But policies matter more than press releases. I'll keep fighting for the women, the poor, and the left behind, whether you see it or not. Her voice was still sharp, but something in her delivery had softened. The fire was there, but the footing less certain. Bondi didn't gloat. She simply nodded once, slow. Then, go fight, Congresswoman. But don't mistake presence for performance. I don't need a podium to protect people. I've done it behind closed doors, in courtrooms, and in crisis. And I'll keep doing it long after this segment ends. The applause hit like a wall. This wasn't cheerleading. It was a verdict. As Rachel Harper tried to close the segment, the camera panned across the audience. Signs held high, hashtags on phones. TikTok live streams flashing Bondi's quote, "Peace without strength is just performance in disguise." Crockett looked over, her face composed, but her eyes heavy. She had fought. She had shown up. But in that moment, on that stage, Pam Bondi had owned the room. The debate ended, but the real storm had just begun. As Rachel Harper gave her final sign-off and the studio lights dimmed slightly, the room didn't exhale, it erupted. Audience members were still standing. Dozens of phones hovered midair, still recording. The sound of applause hadn't faded. It had become rhythmic. A chant started near the back of the MAGA section. Pam! 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 Pam Bondi stood with poise, offering a polite nod to the crowd, but her expression remained measured. No gloating, no smirk. Just the quiet confidence of a woman who had seen victory in less glamorous settings, courtrooms, depositions, back-channel negotiations, and now simply added a televised debate to her resume of takedowns. Jasmine Crockett stood, slowly. She shook Harper's hand with grace, but her steps were heavy. The defiance was still in her shoulders, but her eyes showed the weight of what had just unfolded. She had come to spar. She hadn't expected to be steamrolled. Backstage, the staff buzzed like bees after a rupture. Producers whispered while scrolling through trending tabs. Interns were already pulling quotes for social reels. One producer muttered without looking up, Bondi just shut down Crockett, and the internet knows it. Within 20 minutes, Bondi overrules, prosecution not politics, and Bondi vs. Crockett trended in the top 5 globally on X. A TikTok clip of Pam's quote, "You don't need applause to protect people, just action," hit 1 million views in 40 minutes, overlaid with dramatic orchestral music and courtroom B-roll footage. A meme circulated of Bondi calmly staring ahead, while Crockett's image froze mid-retort. The caption read, "When you walk in with a press release, but she walks in with case law." Conservative influencers reposted Bondi's moments with captions like, "This isn't politics. This is a masterclass." She didn't clap back. She cross-examined the narrative. Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecutor has the floor. The clip of Bondi countering Crockett's military budget critique with the 90% ISIS leadership elimination stat became a signature viral moment pinned by multiple MAGA pages, cut into a slick edit titled Facts Over Feelings, Bondi Edition. On the other side, progressive accounts tried to rally. Clips of Crockett's remarks about women's health care, economic inequality, and peace were circulated by activists and organizers under hashtags like Justice with Jasmine and Progressives Still Rise. But the numbers didn't lie. The most watched YouTube segment was titled, Pam Bondi Dismantles Congresswoman Crockett in Under 12 Minutes. It hit 1.8 million views in its first 3 hours, with comments like, "This is how you debate with receipts. She wasn't debating, she was prosecuting. I want Bondi leading the next press briefing." News outlets responded quickly. Fox News opened with a highlight reel. Sean Hannity praised Bondi's performance as clinical, factual, and lethal. On Newsmax, one commentator said, "Tonight wasn't just a debate. It was a warning. The old political playbook doesn't work when you're facing a prosecutor." Even CNN, while clearly leaning toward Crockett's messaging, admitted during a panel discussion that Bondi had delivered a strategically dominant performance. One pundit remarked, "You don't need to agree with her to acknowledge she won the room." An op-ed from The Hill called the night a tactical masterstroke by Bondi, noting how she never lost her footing, never got emotional, and responded to every moral jab with legal precision. MSNBC's coverage tried to spin Crockett's argument for peace and representation as a dignified stance, but conceded in their digital article that Bondi landed clearer, more impactful policy points throughout the segment. In terms of reach, Bondi's digital presence exploded overnight. Her official X post quoting herself, "Peace without strength is just performance in disguise," garnered over 4.5 million impressions. A Gallup flash poll conducted the morning after revealed that 68% of viewers believe Bondi won the debate, while 19% sided with Crockett, and the rest were undecided. Google searches for Pam Bondi debate surged 800% within 6 hours. Conservative forums and YouTube commentators declared, "Trump has his closer. Her name is Bondi." Meanwhile, Crockett's team tried to spin a redemptive message. She posted on X, "I'll never stop fighting for justice, peace, and working families. Some will try to silence us, but we rise." The post received a respectable 25,000 likes, but was buried beneath hundreds of quote tweets dissecting her rhetorical slip-ups and Bondi's clean-cut responses. On TikTok, a progressive user attempted to cut together Crockett's best quotes with music, but the comments were filled with replies like, "Sorry, but Bondi brought the facts. Passion doesn't win a trial, evidence does. Crockett tried, but Bondi cross-examined her soul." Bondi's, quote, "You don't need a podium to protect people. I've done it behind closed doors, in courtrooms, and in crisis," appeared the next morning on t-shirts, mugs, and patriotic meme pages. Conservative women's groups rallied around the moment. Women for Liberty announced a digital campaign titled Bondi's Blueprint, focused on law, policy, and composure as the new standard of female leadership. By noon the next day, Bondi was invited to 3 major conservative podcasts, received a private message of congratulations from Trump's office, and appeared on Tucker Carlson's X Live for a recap segment titled How a Prosecutor Redefined the Debate Stage. Meanwhile, internal reports suggested that Crockett's communications team had called an emergency strategy meeting. Some advisors feared that the Congresswoman had walked into a televised deposition without backup. A Politico headline read, "Crockett faced a prosecutor, not a pundit, and it showed." A week later, polling among voters aged 35-60 showed a 22-point bump in Bondi's favorability among independent women. Editorials speculated about a possible Senate run or cabinet post if Trump were reelected. But Bondi didn't tweet victory. She didn't post memes. She simply returned to her usual scheduled meetings, policy consultations, private legal advising, and let the performance speak for itself. In interviews, when asked what she felt about the viral storm, she responded simply, "I wasn't there to trend. I was there to tell the truth." And that, in the end, was the most viral line of all.